Conservation, what it means, the trouble with finding that out is because it doesn't exist in any indigenous African language. That word doesn't exist. Conservation. Even in Kiswahili, we say kuhifadhi. Kuhifadhi is keep something like keep your clothes on a shelf or something like that. It doesn't refer to living systems. So it's a contrived thing. Conservancies, the reason we have so much trouble understanding what they are is because we are not supposed to. They are mongrels. Some are private ranches that were turned to conservancies. Some are land stolen from communities turned into conservancies. Some are land that was stolen from the Maasai a century ago, like Magadi Soda, and now the lease is over and it's turning to a conservancy. So a conservancy, it's a useful tool for disenfranchisement, and it has been well used in Kenya. Hopefully its time is coming to an end. And so the talk is not just about conservation, but it's how it connects to so many different things around us. So it's part of a greater architecture that is not just about the animals. The animals are just the tool we have chosen to use, the most useful tool, because everyone loves wildlife. So conservation and the architecture of empire. Architecture of empire means the architecture of colonialism. As independence came to Africa in the late 50s, early 60s, there was a spike in formation of national parks. And these were essentially white spaces to be conserved in a rapidly blackening continent. That's simply what they were. And we need to understand that in Kenya today, we have many black white people. So white people are not the physically white people I'm seeing here. And we also have many white black people as far as conservation goes. So just keep that in mind as we go along. So this subject of a book I co-authored with Gatumbari a few years, nearly 10 years ago now, The Big Conservation Lie, and it's available various places. And as I finish, I'll get into my most recent work, which is Green and Evil, which I just published last year, which talks less about the animals, but more about the environmental carbon and all that stuff. So what is an Africanist? I found that a good place to start because it's an American term. I hear it a lot in the United States. I've never heard it in Africa. It's a person specializing in the study of African affairs or culture. And I met many Africanists. Not a single one was African. They were all American. So this means we are talking about an external view of Africa. It's never about us, how we see ourselves. It's about how some other people see us as a study subject or as a curiosity or whatever. So I took this from Princeton University webpage. Africa is the continent where our future will be determined. The continent boasts abundance of both cultural and natural resources, home to some of the fastest growing economies, making Africa a fascinating place to study. Not a place to come and study, but a place to study, to look at. So they feel that they are the leaders in the study of Africa. Harvard University also says they are the leading place for African studies in Massachusetts. Conservation education. Remember I said conservation is a contrived term. But we hear a lot about conservation education. And I worked in the field. And this is what we used to do, what you see in the picture there, showing those kids the animals are great, they're cute, this is the horn and all that, and they're endangered, and tourists come to pay money to see them. That's all that cliche stuff. Meanwhile, the same kids we talk to meet wildlife every day on the way home from school. We should be telling them, how do you keep safe from elephants? Don't take a shortcut through the bush. Don't throw stones at elephants. Generally, how to just protect yourselves and the wildlife, keep safe. But this is not what we do, because our perspective of conservation is about showing the external view and tourism. And the confluence of tourism and conservation is poison. Tourism is poison to conservation. Tourism is supposed to be a byproduct of conservation, but in Kenya, we treat it as the purpose for conservation. And that's the problem. And that's reflected in the low quality of personnel we have at the head of our statutory bodies, the ministry, the PS, very low-level individuals. Because After all, it's just tourism, isn't it? The external view of Africa is about extraction. It's when external eyes look at African forests, they see wood for their wood-paneled offices, their furniture, etc., etc. Yet, the reality of the trees in place, the animals in place, the ecosystems is far more beautiful than wood-paneled offices. But the external view cannot see this. This is why we work so hard to, instead of maintaining it in a beautiful form in situ, we bring all sorts of tools to extract. There's so much noise being made now about some mountain bongos have recently been brought back to Mount Kenya. But no one has, who took them away and why? For those of you who don't know the history, Mount Kenya Safari Club was the main wildlife looting place for Kenya. All the people used to do animal capture business for zoos, etc., would come and base themselves there and go into northern Kenya to collect gravy zebras, lions, leopards, bongos also from the forests around. So that's what it is. So imperialism is what's going on. Imperialism in practice requires violence. That's why conservation is so violent in Kenya. We all know about the disappearance of Brian Odhiambo, many extrajudicial killings all over the place. Conservation in Kenya is violent. That's why KWS rangers only carry guns and bullets. They don't carry handcuffs. They're not in the business of arresting people. This is the IUCN definition of conservation. I just highlighted in red protection through other effective means. Other effective means, those are the illegal means. Those are the extrajudicial killings, displacements, etc., etc. So it's allowed. These are human rights violations, but it's allowed under conservation. You couldn't shoot someone to make room for a tobacco farm or a factory or a school, whatever. But when he's anywhere near a rhino, you can go ahead and shoot him. And we have a big problem in Kenya now that a lot of the violence, which was the monopoly of the state, is now in the hands of NGOs. We have armed groups like that, not under the command of an OCS or any of the security organs, not in a GK vehicle, but in an NGO vehicle under the command of a program officer who may or may not be qualified. And so many violations happen there. So protected areas are a primitive conservation tool. Someone said parks must fall. That would be heaven if that happened. And certainly what we should not be doing is creating any new parks or protected areas anywhere. So we should be conserving species, systems, and livelihoods. Livelihoods is a reference to human beings. Imperialism through conservation requires dishonesty. A few years ago, the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust put out this poster, said one African elephant is killed every 15 minutes. If you do the math, that comes around 100,000 elephants a year. Where are the carcasses? We can't bury these huge animals. But it was all right because it was a lie told in the interest of conservation, right? And if you can't see it clearly, but the fine print there says, at this rate, there will be none left in the world by 2025. Here we are, 2026. I'd like you to walk across the bush in Laikipia and see if you'll make it safely. Annexation of areas. This is a map of Mount Kenya Forest. The yellow line shows that there's a current project going on to fence Mount Kenya Forest. Geographically and thematically, it's crazy to even think about it. But the Rhino Arc is doing it. And many people go to the Rhino Church to raise money for this nonsense. Mount Kenya Forest is dry season grazing, source of wood fuel. Even some religious sects go up there for prayers, etc., medicinal plants, beekeeping, and all that. No one thinks about that because the line they say is to protect people from elephants, so it's an elephant fence. On the ground, that's the fence. Even a rabbit can't get through that fence. You can imagine the environmental impact of it. Imperialism requires kings and emperors, and we have them. The first one was Roosevelt. He's the one who first came up with this primitive idea of removing indigenous people from an area and saying it is conserved. He started it in the United States with Yosemite, Yellowstone, and those, and he spread this cancer to the rest of the world with his famous safari to Kenya in 1910, 1911, And here we are. Further into the 20th century, you have those icons of African conservation. Jane Goodall, Richard Leakey, Daphne Sheldrake, George Adamson, Joy Adamson, Diane Fossey, Bernard and Michael Zimek. None of them are black. How many of you can name a black conservation icon? Yeah. And that one is because she was recognized with the Nobel Prize. She was actually a vilified figure in Kenya. But this shows a problem. Either conservation is racist or black people just don't care about wildlife. You can take your choice out of those two things. And some of them are actually real kings and royalty. Prince William justifies trophy hunting, while at the same time he says we must stop poachers. The difference between a trophy hunter and a poacher is the color of his or her skin. It's as simple as that. And this is what, when we talk about agriculture or education or business, Prince William can't tell us anything. We don't give a shit what he says about any of those things. But when it's wildlife, suddenly, yes, sir. Yes, sir, what does he say? And we celebrate the task trust and all this, and we think what he says actually makes sense. He also talks a lot about our human population. Human population of Kenya is lower density than that of the UK. And we actually feed our kids. They are not funded by taxpayers. So excuse me if we don't care what Prince William thinks about reproduction. We've complained about the white people talking about conservation. So now they brought in a black person to talk about conservation. There was this big Netflix series, Obama talking about our national parks. No, his national parks are Yellowstone and Yosemite and those ones. But he was even talking about Tsavo, saying it's our national park. His and whose? No, sovereignty must be recognized in all fields, even environment and conservation. And this is not excusable. Mordecai cannot come and go to Yellowstone and say, these are our wonderful bears here and all this. No. It doesn't work like that. We need to be responsible, and that's how people get responsible. If you remove sovereignty, immediately people don't protect what's there because they believe it belongs to someone else. Now, the biggest problematic animal species in many parts of the world is the rhino. Rhinos have become a burden because of WWF, because of Lewa, because of Olpejeta. Rhinos, the value of their horn makes them such a useful tool for oppression of humans. You won't believe the figures, the numbers of people killed in Kaziranga National Park in India, in Assam, because of the one-horned rhino population there. And the same thing in Lake Nakuru National Park. If you're seen walking anywhere near there, you'll get shot. Solio, those who live in Laikipia, there's an unofficial curfew along the fence line of Solio because of the rhinos. And these are problems. So WWF decide they want to move rhinos, save rhinos by moving them. They moved around 18 rhinos, 12 rhinos, 2018, and they all died. Balan nearly lost his job. So we need to understand what they were doing. They were moving them to a sanctuary to transfer power from the park where they're getting the rhinos to the sanctuary where they're putting the rhinos, which is in the charge of WWF. So that's what was happening. So we had also the myth, the long sob story about Sudan. Sudan was a white rhino, so-called northern white rhino, brought from Druv Kralove Zoo in Czech Republic to Olpejeta. And that's where they started this myth of the last 7 or so white rhinos. And they all died, and finally Sudan died, and there was this strange situation of government dignitaries attending a funeral of a wild animal. I mean, it's good we only laugh at this because it's not right to cry in front of everyone. But it's tragic that a whole state system can be this dumb. Well, even though before Sudan died, they extracted as much sperm as they could from Sudan. And now they're working very hard on $9 million project to fertilize Sudan's daughters with that sperm. So you want to save a species by inbreeding. Even livestock breeders don't. But it's the $9 million that's important. So it's whether the rhinos survive is a minor detail. And having said that, some white rhinos still exist in South Sudan. So it wasn't the last one. But who cares, because the $9 million has come. So the press is also complicit in all this. Now, the vilification of Africans is a key part of conservation. Even during the COVID pandemic, it was said we lose wildlife because there are no tourists coming. Tourists don't save wildlife. Rangers save wildlife or protect wildlife. And they work whether or not there are tourists coming. In fact, wildlife thrived without tourists disturbing them. And these were respected media outlets, New York Times, National Geographic. They were all talking about this threat that didn't exist. Now, sorry for this being sort of academic, but that's a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The classic conflicts is where wildlife conservation is supposed to be restricted to, where it's about safety and physiological needs of the wildlife and people. So when an elephant raids your farm or kicks your brother or something, that's the classic conflicts. But we moved it up to complex conflicts. Complex conflicts now became billionaires needing a piece of Africa. And there's some Maasais here who need to be moved off this piece of Africa to make room for billionaires. And then there's a government here happily moving those people off their own land to make room. Those are the complex conflicts. And if you look at this as a coarse world map, the green areas are the imperialists, roughly. The orange or brown areas are the countries they expect to work, the green people expect to work for them. The black areas in the global south are the areas that the people in the green area expect to own. They expect to oppress. And this is how it works. Those are the top carbon polluters around the world from Sightline Institute. And those are the carbon credits or sequestration projects. The only place that's sort of honest is Asia, where pollution is happening in the same place where the carbon sequestration projects are happening. But the rest, it's all pollute in the north and sequester in the south. And we have so many of them in Kenya. We even started some, the other day, the Ministry of Environment started some stupid thing they call the carbon registry. No one even knows what that is. But the NGOs are the ones who paid for the meeting that launched this thing. If you ask the minister today what the carbon registry is or what a carbon credit is, I guarantee you she doesn't know. Consumption of Earth's resources. We need 5 Earths if we all consumed at the rate of the United States. We'd need 1 Earth if we consumed at the rate of Niger, sort of typical African country. We'd need less than 1 Earth if we consumed per capita at the rate of India. But I've never seen an Indian coming to advise us about conservation. And they're the ones who know. It's always Americans and Europeans. This is the definition of imperialism. So what are the pillars of this cruel structure? UNESCO. The UN is a bipolar organization anyway. Sorry for anyone here who works there. The mass media, they drive propaganda. The peer-reviewed publication system, those of you who are academics, you know about this. Carbon neutrality, like net zero. You hear this net zero. Net zero is a scientific fallacy. It's bullshit. Even as I stand here, I'm emitting carbon dioxide. Then I can't be net zero. You hear companies want to be net zero. Countries claiming they're net zero. What are we talking about? But it's been said so many times that it's been accepted. The other thing is startups. Startups are some of the most ridiculous things you've heard of. Their purpose is rarely what they claim it to be. And I'll talk more about this. And then there's conferences that sanitize this stuff. The Global Landscapes Forum is happening in Nairobi in a couple of days. Some of you, I hope you'll be able to attend to go and see what this imperialism looks like. So, mass media. I think some of you may recognize that still is from The Lion King. And what's the propaganda here? We have all these African animals, but they speak in English and American accents. And I guarantee you there's no black person in the Lion King, no black human in the Lion King, set as it is in Africa. Then there's Tarzan. This is actually from a very old story, first published 1914. But the key thing again with Tarzan, a white man, he's a noble of some sort. He's in the jungle in Africa. He's communing with animals, but again, there's no black people. And when black people do appear in Tarzan, they're interlopers and criminals. Those of you who've seen those iterations. So this is the propaganda. It seems like kids' movies, but it's very powerful propaganda because that's inspiring some kid to want to come to Africa. And he'll be shocked when he goes to Masai Mara and sees black people. So what are these guys doing here? Media and literature. I'm not sure about other languages, but in English it's really bad. You have game meat and venison, and then you have bush meat. Game meat is when it's eaten by white people. Bush meat is when it's eaten by black people. You have hunting and poaching. You have exploring and encroaching. You have ranchers, you have herders. You have travelers, you have nomads. You have people with names and needs, and then you have communities where we kill the individual. This is normalized in literature. And as a scholar, I'm ashamed of what the peer review publication has come to. Because someone even published an article saying that European colonizers killed so many indigenous Americans that the planet cooled down. As in that genocide was environmentally friendly. But it got published. And there's her name, Aileen Woodward. And that's not published in 1885. That's 2019. We all know about all the literature that's saying the Maasais and their cows are producing too much methane, as opposed to the nuclear power stations and the military-industrial complex. So now it's the Maasai cows that are the problem. And when we look at this, if you argue for reduction of methane from animals, why don't we kill off all the buffaloes and wildebeest? They don't belong to anyone. Let the Maasais keep their cattle. But no, we don't want that. And people who love biodiversity are notorious for hating human diversity. That's a fact we need to live with. So, UNESCO, Ngorongoro World Heritage Site. You see all these academic journals talking about Ngorongoro Conservation Area and the human footprint. And it seems harmless. Ngorongoro crater, too many people in Ngorongoro. Scientific academic publications. So it seems harmless until you start seeing the beating and torture of people in Ngorongoro, Maasai people, to get them out of there. This is what happened. This is the reality. And now we ended up with conservation refugees in southern Kenya who have run away from northern Tanzania. This is what those ridiculous academic publications can justify. This graphic is from Nature, top impact academic journal. It says the world has, someone did some strange math and decided the world has 422 trees for every person. And that graphic's meant to show the per capita. So number 1, they put Canada. Number 2, Greenland. Number 3, Australia. Number 4, United States. The top 4 are all settler colonies. The only African country there is Ethiopia. Ethiopia has very little forests and a very high human population. But they did not include Gabon there or DRC. Because that might be number 1 and it might imply that black people can conserve forests. And academia can't have that. Academia can't accept that. So we end up placing this, calling Africa this empty space. So you find these startups all coming in. That's Emmanuel de Merode. He started some crypto mining thing in Virunga Park. Turbines driven by the various rivers there. And this is no longer conservation, this is business. And conservation is just the tool used to create space for it. Startup funding, Kenya gets the highest amount of startup funding in Africa. So Kenya is Africa's bullshit powerhouse. When you want to do when you want to do any questionable thing, unethical thing, rubbish thing, bring it to Kenya. You'll be welcomed and you'll be given space to do it. So this is an example. And if you can go to your phones later, look at the page for Octavia Carbon. They offer carbon removal packages. It claims they extract carbon from the atmosphere and then they inject it deep into the rocks, into the ground. And they're a Danish startup, I think. And I don't know why they're doing it in Kenya. If there's no carbon dioxide in Denmark and there are no rocks in Denmark, but I don't know why they're doing it in Kenya. But you go to their page, they say there's carbon removal packages. So I just said, arbitrarily said 500 kilos of carbon. I want 500 kilos of carbon removed. And that costs, I think, it costs $50 a month. $500 a month. So $1 per kilo of carbon removal per month. This is bullshit. But it's there, it's legal. You can check it on your phone. And they've been given land in Rift Valley, somewhere near Suswa, to do this. And they're creating carbon credits by doing this. And this is the machine, this strange thing is what they claim to be using to do it. I'm not kidding, check it online. And this is the schematic diagram they claim to be, that the geothermal plant supplies the DSC, direct air capture facility, they capture it and inject it into the earth. This all looks very funny until you hear that it's a $9 million investment or something. Then you realize it's not funny, it's money laundering, it's organized crime. That's their facility in Rift Valley. That's where they're removing the carbon dioxide. So the target, I'm talking about carbon trading now. Targets of carbon trading is eliminate livestock. That's number one target. Number two is secure the land for the use of oligarchs and capitalists and prevent any further use by the locals. That's what's going on right now with the so-called carbon craze that's going on. So this is what they talk about the Global Landscape Forum. I had the dubious privilege of attending it a few years ago. And I found that KALRO, the Kenya Agricultural and Livestock Research Organization, actually has an office tasked with reducing the livestock in Kenya. A government office tasked with reducing livestock in Kenya. And that's because of that paper you saw talking about livestock emissions. And people say that it's a recent problem. Their livestock are degrading the land, etc. But no, it's not a recent problem. That's a paper, agricultural journal from Agricultural Department in Kenya, 1935. They were already talking about overstocking in Kenya, 1935. Kenya's population then, I think, was around 5 million people. So the problem of overstocking is not environment, is they cannot stand wealthy pastoralists. The colonial government couldn't stand these wealthy people who don't want to work for us. Post-independence government still can't stand these wealthy people who don't need the government. Mount Kenya Forest, that's about 20 kilometers from where I live. There's a radioactive materials dump. My water, the water I use at home comes from that catchment. There's no radioactive material industry in Kenya. This waste was imported from someplace. And that's the reality. And it's just in the protection buffer zone around Mount Kenya National Park. It's about 200 meters from the gate. So let's see propaganda for what it is. When we see pictures of giraffe from Kenya and all that, you see that sort of thing. Nobody shows you this. The fact that black people can live with wildlife in peace. They don't want you to see that. No one shows you this. This is Karagita near Naivasha. The giraffes, they hang out with people all the time. But National Geographic won't show you this. David Attenborough won't show you this. Because you're not supposed to be living peacefully with these animals. They talk about wetlands and rivers and they show you pictures like that, but no one will show you that. That's in Burkina Faso. It's a village called Bazule where crocodiles are their totem and they feed them and the kids hang out with them and all that kind of thing. No one shows you that. That would be turned into a conservancy. There'd be a fence. There'd be a guard to shoot any kid coming to the crocodiles. And meanwhile, there'd be some wealthy hunter coming to shoot the crocodiles to make some Hermes bags. That sort of capitalistic thing is what would happen. So National Geographic shows you that about hyenas, but they don't show you that. There are people who keep them. This is Nigeria. That's in Ethiopia. In Addis even, late at night, you'll have the hyena. You see hyenas in the streets. But they don't show you that because we are not supposed to be living in a peaceful context. So they'll show you that eland, but they won't show you that one. That's in Talek near Masai Mara. This eland just hangs around the shops. And this is what the reality is, far more beautiful than what they show. And this is what we need to work on going ahead, how we can share these spaces. That's Kazinga in Uganda. So there's a woman washing her clothes there. There's buffaloes hanging around there. There's elephants and kids playing and all that kind of thing. There is no NGO in sight. There is no fence. And again, this is not from 1935. This is 2019 from a friend of mine called Paul Kirui. And so this is possible. It's more sophisticated. It is more complicated to do, but that's why we have PhDs. We can't have PhDs and be coming up with solutions like fencing. That's Trump and Mexico. That's not us. Thank you.